Hi, I'm Seamless, and today is Wednesday, which means it's time for a new viewer track review video. If you'd like to have your track in one of these videos, what you do for the time being is hop on over to the Discord channel and submit the track in the submissions channel. There's rules and all that kind of thing there to help you out, make it all work out, and help me out to make it all work out. And so we can do things like listen to this track, who is Mr. Mrow's Midtempo Test. Let's see what this one sounds like, shall we? Bam. Whoops. All right. Well, so stuff. This was certainly stuff the track. Two very big things pop out at me as something I would comment as problems on this track. But before we get there, though, I want to say I like it. I like the rhythm. I like the sounds. I like the differences in the beats and things, and especially some of those beats that like I usually don't like in things, but because of the way that the sounds worked with them, it was something interesting and good. So I like that about this. So let's talk about the presence problem. That's problem one. One, it's like it feels like you separated everything so perfectly and cleanly that they're just in wholly different universes from each other. There's a background pad element that's so very wide and stereo that it doesn't even sound like it's in the song. It's really very technically good, proficient, good job with that. That's a way to separate it, but you separated it out so far that there's no middle in this song anymore. The middle is basically the drums. And a lot of what would be the sort of driving elements. So here, actually, here's a good example. Like in the beginning, I was actually going to recommend that you not put in this beat because it felt really nice when it all came together. But up until then, like this build-up is a good idea, but I would just take the bass out of it. It's kind of a thing I would say, and it's mostly because there was so much power distributed through this whole moment, and everything was so kind of behind it that when it all came together, it really felt like everything was so behind stuff, and that feeling didn't really go away. And that's illustrated by the beginning, but that's the whole presence thing I was talking about, and you can kind of see it too. Like there's a frequency hole in some things that contributes. Thank you, mouth. Contributes to the issue at hand. So the beat. This is the second problem, I would say, and it's this double time that happens somewhere. Is it here? The first time this happens, it's not engaging to me. I was going to say it's not great, but it actually might be pretty dope, in the right circumstances. I honestly was kind of against the sort of reggaeton-ish approach. Like, I was about to have an issue with that, but the way, like, that right there is a fun moment. Like the interplay of the beat with that is great, and this is a great content to do it with. And actually, I got into that beat. This one, not so much. Thing is, though, is that later, this actually does work out. Like I like the double time in this moment, not just because it's at the end, but because it's the rhythm that works with it is more interesting, versus this guy, which just feels random and out of place. And I think there was enough going on with what there was already with the beats that you didn't necessarily need to do that. I really like the half-timey. Do you just not go back to it at the end? I guess you don't. Like the main riff of the whole thing. I like that straight play of it. And I feel like that could have come back in place of trying to keep going into farther different distances. So that combined with some more focus on the melodic elements, that's more than just having them be so in the stereo that you basically wonder if they were ever there at all. Were there? Did you imagine them? Did I imagine a fake pad in the background? That'd be one hell of a mixing trick to put a big enough hole in something that you force the listener to think there's something there by making them hypnotize them into writing the rest of the song for them. Good Lord. Well, hello. Anyway, something I'm gonna boop. Yeah. Anyway, moving on. The next person in our list is Saint Introvert with Glowing Bodies Waltz. Let's see what this guy is like. 1, 2, 3. Well, that was very, very cool. I really dig the scape on this. I was also looking, and especially in this bit in the middle, and then the bit with the drums when they came back. This the quote unquote snare of the moment. This kind of woodblock hit that's very like in the echo here. This I like it because the blend of pad here and it is similar, and it's interesting to see how the how well they work together. Like we can hear it work together, but we can also visually see that like pretty much why it work together. It's like it's thematically and behaviorally related in a location to the point where it's almost guaranteed to work. And you can use that kind of information to inform choices on things. Anyway, so let's talk about the mix on this. I liked the sub on this track a lot. I liked how it moved, and I like what it did when it moved. I like how it's cut. It could be a little lower even. So a lot of the time, I have mentioned a choice in key informing your mastering. And this is because when you have a particular key at a particular level, the lower you go in sub, in order for that fundamental to be heard at the same power, it needs more level, which means you have less headroom as a result. So the lower you go, like the less you can push it is the sort of the point before it starts to be a problem. But certain textures and certain feelings are only possible at those low oscillations. Like a lot of Cell Dweller work comes to mind because there's this really nice tone he gets in the songs where he goes low, like even at like D. E is like low end low for pretty epic stuff that's loud, because lower than that you start to have the problem. But like you get, if you're like okay with the distortion and stuff that comes with it, then D and C start to have this sort of chunk to it, and it's because there's a time in between oscillations that you can hear. There's more time for stuff to happen, so you can hear more occur essentially. And the lower you go, the more that's true, but also the lower you go, the less you really can rely on having a sub, because you just can't hear it at that point. A, and B, not a lot of systems will reproduce it, and C, the level impact on the track is just not worth it. That's why a lot of metal, for example, that's tuned even lower than that, is just no fundamental tone. There's mostly this first couple of harmonic focus. And that gets us the feeling of the note that it is without having to care about like the power and the fundamental. And that's a really good idea. What it also means is that when you're not doing like metal, you might notice if you've done metal and then you've also do electronic stuff, that metal is not as loud as electronic stuff. And it's a little bit because of what we just talked about how if you go down tune certain amounts, pushing it hard becomes a problem. And if you don't have fundamental, then you don't have that power, then you're not going to be that loud, but you also can't be pushed that hard. And that's what metal's sort of texture is like. And what it means, though, is that if you're not going to try for hardness, if you're not going to try for ultimate loudness, you can be in whatever key you want. You just have to live with the reality. And this track does that pretty good. Like the reality of just sort of corralling the sub behavior in a certain range and then letting that be a thing. That's a good way to solve that. As far as utilizing it, though, you might notice at some points this track clips. And it's kind of odd considering how smooth this track is. And by smooth, I mean like, again, not going for loudness. It's down tempo-y. It's pretty loud. You can see the sausage happening, but a lot of that is like a roundness power, not a hardness power. Roundness being that there's just levels of the big pads happening versus loudness. There's not a lot of huge transient hits that have to cut through that stuff, which is usually the hard thing about mastering the loud stuff. If we're not doing either of those, or we're just kind of focusing on one of them, then this is a lot easier. So, what's up with the clipping? My typical recommendation for this is to focus on what intersample peaking is, because that's probably why certain things are pushed pretty hard into a limit that's probably there, and then there's behavior that happened between the samples that was not correctly limited for. It is a process of sample rate, so you need to increase either your global sample rate or increase the sample rate of the item doing the processing. In this case, it's the compressor. And Maximus, for example, has an oversample option, which is what this is. And other compressors will have either resampling or oversampling. We'll just tell you that it's intersample peaking thing. And that's the thing that's for to do this kind of thing. Or you can do the clipping yourself. You can use an actual distortion unit to do clipping. That's what clipping does, the shape. But if it's distorting, then it'll still... actually, I wonder... I'm pretty sure intersample peaking is a process that will affect distortion too. But distortion modules also have oversampling. At least the Wave Shaper does in FL. I would imagine other ones do as well, because aliasing is a big problem in the process when your whole idea is multiplying higher harmonic results out of lower harmonic content. Anyway, musically, this track is beautiful. It's just up and down great. Like the mixing way of it to make it like not clip or whatever would barely alter anything about this track, and because it's pretty much fine. I have no real complaint about it other than that, and I think the way you handle things was beautiful. All right, moving on to Mr. Vybson's The Void. Yeah. What? Some heads. Woo. Cool. All right, so parts of this were gold. Like, I dug the hell out of this whole last section. Everything about that. This is my standard on what this song's goodness is for me. It's dope. The rest of this was also similarly dope, but there were some sections in it, and also the progression kind of got to me a little bit. So did it happen here? Right. So the way that this progression ends, where it begins. Coming back down to the 1 at the end of that really kind of doesn't work for me. I would just almost any other note. Actually, even doing the same thing twice, just get down to the 7, staying there, or coming back up even to a 4 or a 5. Like, just the 1, especially because you do it twice in a row. Like, I thought that maybe you did that here because you were gonna go somewhere with it here, but you did the same thing twice. And just I genuinely don't have a lot of things to say about mid theory and progression for most of the time, but this is one of them, and gets me. And part of it, so the rest of it gets me, is also kind of what's going on over here. Like, this was great, I want to say. Like, this song speaks to me, the way that this is structured. Like, it is, I just love its epicness and the way that it moves. And part of that, because of that, I can hear what it, like, could be through here. So this orchestra bit with the stuff happening. All the things that's here are fine, doing what they're doing. So there's two kinds of ways you can approach doing what I would recommend doing, which is adding more motion to the individual bits. So like the string has the string that it's doing, but also kind of like all the stuff needs to be increasing always. And so that's hard to do on some things that don't necessarily have enough stuff to increase that much without sounding dumb. It's like the string and that stuff, all that sounds good. It doesn't need to be messed with. Or it could be, maybe it'll sound neat. But if you don't want to do that, then layering it with just kind of other things, maybe an ARP, maybe that's just me, but other pads, leads, the same note even, but a synth that you can have a control and a filter on, you can modulate over time, like anything that's the level of present motion I want to hear in there. Because of just how dense the rest of it is. Like, how much is happening makes how little's happening here kind of stand out. Especially for how long it happens, because we're focusing on it. We're really in it there. Mix-wise, I barely have anything to say about this. Like, I was going to talk about how, like, your levels go right up to the edge on there, and that's going to be a problem. It's also clipping. Everything I said about interstable peaking applies to this track, too. Even when you are distorting things. But like how rigidly up to the end frequency wise it goes up there could potentially be a problem, only in genres that aren't designed to be walls like this. This is an excellent wall. Like, good job with that. I even feel like this would hit hard. I mean, they all do. Everything would at the amount of level they get pushed. But usually when I hear songs like this, I feel like a definitive lack of low end. And there was a definitive lack of nothing in this track. This track was on. So, good job, Mr. Vybson. Coming up next, Whyistherumgone? They're here, whip. Whoop. 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 Well, that was nice. This track had a lot of, this was very progressive. It very well began, added on, and then looped. And I'm not knocking it. It was pretty great. It took me almost until the end there. You saw me kind of zooming out. Like, that was me being like, did it not change progression the whole time? And as it turns out, it didn't change progression the entire time. And that's pretty fine. That took me that long for me to even care. That's to say that I didn't even know that it got bad or annoying at that point. That was just me just being like, huh. So progressive, fine. Progressive wise, this was fine, is what I'm trying to say, good lord. And what I mean by that is, like, I would have made something like this by beginning at the beginning and then eventually gotten here and that's sort of that. But this really needed, like, just take one of these note columns and just move it up, make it different every other time. Like, that would have been enough. Everything else about this could have stayed. This reminds me, as I said, of things I would have done. Not super. I would not have done them very intentionally. And actually, this section felt kind of cool because I'm super into Westworld. I dig it a lot. And recently, I got a hold of the old 70s movies, and 70s sci-fi is amazing. It is just visually and everything about it, good lord. But it also has very specific musical quality. It just kind of sounded like it. And this also, like, to that effect, it also reminded me of a lot of 90s gaming soundtracks. So, like, there's plenty of like precedent for this being a sort of style of progression. And as mix wise, like, I bring that up because the mix sort of reminds me of that, and that's not necessarily a good thing. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but like, I'm a fan of how big the kick and things blow stuff up, but it's not very loud. It's not very cohesive, and it's smooshed together, and the presence is pretty wild. I have no idea what your intentions were. If this was, like, I bring up the presence of the stuff sounding like this because, for all I know, this could have been your intention, because this is what it sounds like. And it, as a job to have done that intentionally, that would have been very good. So, no idea, as far as your whoopee process goes. If you were to make continued changes to it, honestly, very little, like, add some of those altered transitions in there. Like, just move some of the notes around, change some bigger parameters over time, like big, long stuff, filter types, positions, notes, like on red octaves on stuff, you know what I mean? Like, because the vibe is great. This track has a vibe, and I dig it. And I dig a bit of its old jank kind of smoosh feel. I hope that was something you're cool with. Anyway, moving on to the next track, we got Starblade, Chaos Split. It's labeled, look at that. Alright, let's have a go. I stopped in the... Yeah. Is this the right file? It feels like I got the mid only of this track. I don't think this track is this mono. Yeah. So I dug the key modulation at the end there. All right, let's talk about this track. I'm operating on the assumption that this wasn't exactly the correct render. That's a thing to say if it was, though, because if it was, there is some problems. The I don't know where the side is. It's the most mid version of this kind of track I've ever heard. And it still sounds like this. On top of that, there was just odd choices of presence. Things would pop in and out on top of each other in ways that made me want to think that there was stuff missing from it. And also, like, the main bass sound hit on this. I'm very confused if this was the real intention of your drop here. And part of why I'm still like kind of jury's out on that is because you utilize this stuff later on in a way that did feel a little more full force. And that made me think that either that was your idea of kind of like underselling and foreshadowing in a way that you could build up to it to go to the end and make that kind of the big finale, like, which makes sense as a strategy. It's just as an implementation, not that sound. It's just not that. It worked okay as a filler thing when it was skipping around or later and whatnot, but not by itself. I will say, though, the sheer variety and availability of sounds in this track is just a lot. You can kind of see it happening. Like, looks like somebody's very complicated VHS case with all the sides of different movies adding up into some weirdness. I would recommend also with your progression that you have in your drop, you just have the progression in there. Just have it follow the progression. I know in a lot of my stuff, when I do it, I do a lot of kind of like A and B section where the A doesn't have a progression and the B does. But in this is like overly very sort of melodic focused to the point where, because you have so much melodic stuff in there, the fact that it's riding the root the whole time starts to show. And either focus on some of the basses more, or because you got the melody stuff, just have it progress, have it go through the motions. Like there's a motion on it, have it do it. The droning of the sub starts to grate, and later on also, like pretty much on all the occasions where you can hear the lead in there, you want to have the reharmonization of the low end in there with it, because that's what you expect with how we trained on it on coming in. So that's a big part of that too. Structurally, this is nice. Like, I dig the epicness of it all. This is all very big and beautiful and cool and good. It just is utterly centered and lacking, like, top presence. And not just, I don't mean high frequency stuff, although you can very plainly see the big, large deficits and where they show up. Which again makes me wonder if this isn't missing just so much stuff. Let me know in the comments about that. And let's move on to the next twack. We have Marmaladeparty's Carbohydrate. you know like a good ARP. This was a good ARP. This is also mixed quite well, save for the clip-in noses all over it. I dug the texture, but the intersample peaking and all that stuff. Be deliberate about it. This is actually a good example of the stuff I was talking before about like having a background element and modulating the things about it. Because there's more than just like filters and things to modulate. This is a good example of modulating not just the notes and the progression and things, but also stuff like the values and the delay that's on it, and also the note length and that kind of thing. Because it started off a little blurry, and then it even modulated in and out of it. Was it immediately after this part? Where did I start doing that? You can see the holes in it, which is kind of fun. And that's, yeah, there you go. And that's enough to make it like a new and varied part. And especially in a background element, like that's the level of alteration you want to have on some stuff, because it doesn't detract if you had something more leady to it. Like you could have a more like even a vocal or something, but if that makes that level of change behind those elements, it's enough to make it feel like the section is new, even if you just repeated it. And that's how you do grooves. So that was cool. Didn't have much complaints about the structure, the air, and the ambience. Like the way this felt was very nice, and how loud it was. It's a bit dark for my tastes on this style. I'd have EQ'd up a bit, like more presence up here, and a bit also with the stuff on the clipping. But other than that, dopeness is this track. And our final track for today is Clout, Allegory of Free Will. I assume it's clout. I'm pronouncing this visually phonetically. All phonetics are visual. Yes. It's K1 and out. I assume it's pronounced clout. Anyway, here we go. That was pretty rad. It had an almost vaguely Indian hip-hop vibe to it near the end there. I would recommend coming down a bit near like 500 to 1K range on just about everything. Not necessarily on the master, but just on like individually on an instrument level. Like this guy, for example. when he's by himself, I note that like this sort of area is a bit hot, and when it's layered up there with the strings, which by themselves are also pretty hot there. They're not really by themselves there, but you know what I mean? They add up, and when it's all together, it adds up. You can pretty well see this very big old bump in the middle, and it's not a bad thing. Like this is mixed well enough that it's not clipping or anything like that. So if this were to be used as something kind of backgroundy, and then it would turn down, then its presence there would basically just be how it feels in there. I would think then that the actual desire would be to hear the elements that are essentially kind of up here-ish more. And not necessarily by boosting this stuff, but by just reducing how present it is here. Because the rest of this, balance-wise and presence-wise and music-wise, it's very good. It's a very nice track. I dug most of it. I also dug how kind of... like this beat portion of it is kind of cool. I'd have shortened up the hats though on it. Like they kind of lag on over. Like they linger over stuff after their events are done happening to the point where it feels almost like jagged in a way that doesn't feel totally pleasing, but it's not like bad. And it's a weird thing in specific stuff to focus on in a way that might not have mattered to anybody but me. Anywho, decent job was decent. If anybody has any questions about any of this, please let me know. If you'd like to have your tracks in these videos, head on over to the Discord and follow the rules there. If you have any questions about any of this, please let me know. I just said that. Yep, but you know, it's good to remind us of things that we said 6 seconds ago. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and all of that good stuff. And as usual, have a nice day.